is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. I thought Shai Hulud was a hardcore band for the 90s, and he said, "Oh, Hambone." Stu Horvath.
I mean, they are. They are a hardcore band from the 90s.
You know, it's funny because I ran into them like here and there, like during my out and about phase, you know, when I was deeply in the music scene. And I was like, man, Shai Hulud's such a weird name. And I had no idea. Like, you know, I had, you know, maybe seen Dune kind of when I was younger once, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. And then like I made a comment similar to that. I was like, that's kind of a weird name. I'm like, yeah, man, it's from Frankie Herbert's Dune. I was like, what? Like, it's the big worm. I like the one in Beetlejuice. I'm like, no, it's the sandworm. Like, you know, I've had this conversation with like several people, but like at first, like, honest to God, you know, the first time I ever really in my brain attributed Shai Hulud to anything, it was, you know, the hardcore band from like 1995 or something like that.
I mean, like, of all like the nerd words they could have used, I think that they picked like the best one because it does sort of sound like something like cool without like most people who aren't like serious Dune heads don't have a clue what it is, you know. Like I have read Dune and I didn't know what it was for a long time. So there you go.
Yeah. And then I seen it and I was like, oh, well, that's tough. I was like, they're a hardcore band. That's a real tough looking worm. Yeah. I get it now. So anyway, we're talking about the Dune board game today. Stu just played it like last week. And you know, like we've been doing these shows for a long time. We're coming up on our 4th anniversary, July 7th.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of jokes that I got to come up with. And sometimes I got to come up with them on the fly. Sometimes they land. Sometimes they definitely don't. But, you know, I feel like I was in the pocket for this one.
Yeah, no, and it's okay if they don't. I feel like I feel like the reaction to the joke doesn't matter so much as the existence of the joke. And the fact that you can come here for a joke every week probably is a little bit of light for people.
I thank you, sir. I appreciate you saying that. I mean, mostly I'm trying to pop you every week, but I'm also trying to pop like several of our listeners who like, you know, interact with me. And I know that they're listening and I'm hoping that they're in their car being like, oh my God, Hambone, Shai Hulud, you know, like. So anyway, you played the Dune board game for the first time last Friday.
Yeah, and it's been a long time coming. My wife gave it to me for Christmas in 2019, and then the pandemic happened, so we never really got it to the table. I was really kind of like bummed about that, and because it is a bit of it's like a power grid level game or a Scythe. You know it's going to run over 2 hours, so like there needs to be sort of like a commitment ahead of time.
Yeah, like this is what we're playing tonight.
Yeah. And like last Friday, Ed was just like, let's play Power Grid. And I was just like, we just played Power Grid. Like, and I actually said no to Power Grid. And I was like, let's try something new. Let's try Dune. And everybody was like, oh no.
Oh yeah.
Because Dune is intimidating, I think. And wrongly so. Dune is cool because Dune is like an early board game. It comes out in 1979. It's from Avalon Hill. And it's one of the first board games it's a strategy game. It's not a war game. And it has very little in common with like the casual board games of the time, you know, that we grew up with, like the Monopoly or the Candyland or, you know, that kind of thing, where there's just like no mechanical friction.
Right.
So Dune is like one of a handful of early games that really kind of sets the stage for the larger sort of board game renaissance, I think. And you could feel it playing it. I actually had my dates wrong when we were playing it. I thought that this influenced Cosmic Encounter. It's the other way around. Cosmic Encounter is a really strong influence on this game. But other things, there's an auction mechanic for cards that you use in combat. There's the combat system itself uses dials in which you dial in the number of troops that you have. You add a commander and you can use these cards to modify a total number, which you compare, and then whoever has the higher number wins. And that's very much like Scythe, right down to the wheel. It's cool to play something this old that's this sort of influential and to be able to sort of like spot its DNA in all of the games that we've played since that are really familiar. And that's very cool. Basically, it's a strategy game. The person who has control of 3 strongholds wins. That is a tall order, but you're basically moving around troops, trying and spending spice, which is currency, and trying to make these things happen. There's 6 factions total, each lining up with one for the books or movies. So you have House Atreides, you have the Emperor, you have the Harkonnens, you have the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit, and the Fremen. So the rules are straightforward. There's a lot of them, and there's 10 turns, and there's a lot of things that happen during a turn, and reconciling them takes a little while. But none of them are complex, or none of them are complicated. So there's a lot going on, but it's all fairly straightforward. But then the cool thing is that every faction has its own special abilities that specifically break parts of the game to your benefit. That makes every one of them play differently, vastly differently. It makes every game a little bit different because you don't know who's in play. And then the alliance mechanic on top basically will bolt 2 factions together in a way that is always going to be a little bit different. And that's where the cosmic encounterness kind of comes in, like this idea of special abilities breaking the game. And it's cool. The diplomacy aspect of the game is interesting too. And I can't think of other games that really do this. You can't just make an alliance. You can only make an alliance when a Shai Hulud shows up, which is cool. It just, you draw a card and it eats some people, and then, you move on. But it also allows people to make it creates a nexus, and people can make alliances. You can only be in one alliance, and each alliance can only be up to 2 people. Wins with the alliance are joint, so you would both win, but you need to get 4 strongholds instead of just 3.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but then you can't break the alliance until the Sandworm shows up again. You are bound mechanically to this thing. Similarly, you could make deals on the side and stuff like that. Like you could bribe people and try and do that stuff, but none of it can be secret. And if once the agreement is reached, you must make good on your bargain, which I think is also interesting. Most games that have that kind of mechanic are just like, you don't have to do anything. You can say whatever you want. And then,
Oh, so you got to play open phase. You got to own it.
Yeah. So if I'm just like, if you attack them, or no, I will pay you 50 spice right now so that you could do whatever you want with it, but you have to attack those guys over there next turn. You have to do it. Like there's no debating it. You can't take the money and run, which is, I think, really cool.
That is cool. That's actually really cool.
Yeah. And it creates more of like a framework for diplomacy. Diplomacy was really important in our game in a way that was sort of surprising, because the individual alliances didn't matter so much as the fact that Ed wasn't in one. He was playing the Harkonnens. So it very naturally came that Ed was in a position to win. So both alliances allied informally to destroy Ed as best we could. And despite all of our work to that end, in the final turn, he was still in a position to be able to win. And it was very dodgy, but we did stop him. And basically at the end of the game, all of our forces were depleted. We only had the winner, the Spacing Guild, because that's what happens at the end of the game. If nobody has won, the Spacing Guild wins, because, in the narrative, they want nothing to really change on Dune.
Right.
So like Josh got the Spacing Guild win by default, which is like, wow. All right. Really interesting kind of circumstance. Like I don't know. I've never really played a game quite like it, which is interesting to say because I've played a lot of games that are derived from it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds like an appetizer platter of all your favorite games.
Kind of, yeah.
And it's funny for Josh because like he could have just hung back. He might have played the game completely differently, like knowing that it was going to go that way. Like it's a Spacing Guild. It's like, well, I can always win, which I think is kind of cool. Like there's that one faction. It's like, well, I could always win. Like, I could completely like lose, but I'll still win because everyone else loses.
There's a couple others that do that. The Fremen have that option. It's a little bit more complicated. They have to be occupying 2 of the strongholds, and basically no one can occupy the 3rd. And if that happens, they win, which sort of represents them, realizing their terraforming goals.
Right.
And then the Bene Gesserit can win because at the beginning of the game, they can predict the winner. They can choose a card that says like, these people will win in this turn, and I'm going to put this over here. And if that happens, they win the game.
That is crazy.
Right? Like I can't, and like having played the game once without the Bene Gesserit, they're the one, if you play 5 players, they suggest you play without the Bene Gesserits.
Right.
But like having played the game, I can't imagine ever being confident enough in like how the game works, or having like a good idea of being able to predict anybody winning And like, it's not just picking the winning team, it's also picking the turn in which they'll win. And that is crazy to me.
Right. But if that happens and when that happens, it might not happen often, but when it happens, people are going to lose their shit at that table.
Absolutely. All the special abilities are cool. Mine, I played House Atreides, which I didn't want to play, but my ability was I had prescience. So I could look at the cards before they were dealt, and I could take notes on some of them. And in combat, I could determine one of the factors that was being put into the military plan and then plan accordingly for that, which was cool. The Harkonnens have like lots of treachery cards. Another cool mechanic is like at the beginning of the game, you have there's traitors. So basically you have commanders for your faction, and every commander has a corresponding card. If somebody else has that card in combat, they can play that card, and your commander betrays you, you automatically lose, just like in Dune, where the doctor betrays the Atreides. And the Harkonnens' ability is like, I get like a fistful of those. And it's great.
That's awesome.
Because it makes them totally scary to fight. I was right next to Ed, and I had like a huge amount of military strength. And I knew that Ed was getting more and more powerful, but I didn't want to fight him because I didn't want to risk one of my commanders being a traitor and just being blown out of the water.
So that's clever, man.
Yeah.
It really is a smattering of all your favorite games. Like very, very cool, very dynamic. And you said this from when? 1979?
1979.
It's ahead of its time.
Very, very, very much so.
What is it? A minimum 5-6 players?
I think you need 4. I'm not sure what it says on the box. I can't see playing it with 3. You just need the option for multiple alliances, I think.
Right. And you're not going to get that in a 3-player game. Then it's just 2 people ganging up on their buddy, and that's not fun.
Exactly. And I think that it's sort of like deceptively clever. Like, I think the way the alliances interlock is really interesting. Like the Spacing Guild and the Emperor have a natural sort of synergy because their special abilities are that when somebody buys a card in auction, they don't pay the bank, they pay the Emperor. And when you bring troops in from space, you don't pay the bank, you pay the Spacing Guild. So they are kind of like getting their money from the players.
Interesting.
Yeah, who all of them have a hard time getting spice in comparison. So they have like this natural thing where they just, because they're just like the space capitalists, they kind of want to mesh. But then if they do, they became like this money-making conglomerate that was sort of ineffective in terms of like the on the ground action. So like, I think you want to kind of like interlock those things with other alliances to make them more effective. Just generating a huge amount of money isn't a way to win effectively, I don't think.
Right. This is intense. Like this is a very like cool like vibe to me as far as like tricky game.
Yep.
It does sound like there's a lot of trickiness, a lot of deception, a lot of like politicking, and also like a lot of, really trying to look out for yourself with the potential that there are guilds who can just win.
Yeah.
So that's cool, man. This one's got levels. It's got layers, like a 7-layer dip of like, Dune.
And the deception is interesting because it's all really out there. It's not hidden. You're being deceitful, but there's a certain amount of just like it's on the table and you have to kind of navigate it, unlike like a hidden trader game or something where like it is actually secret and in your pocket. And I think that's sort of interesting and special because the game really holds up. So you can see the deception sort of happening or the potential deception, and the game still works.
Right. And I think it's also cool that even with all of that, there's certain things that you do that will lock you in to your promise.
Yep.
Because, we've seen it before in a lot of other games where like, yeah, you do this for me, I'll do this for you. But like, there's something underhanded going on there and it never works out the way that you're actually paying for it to work out. And you end up paying twice. You end up paying, the cost up front, and then you're paying for it when you get bit in the ass on the back end. So I think that even with all of that other stuff going on, having that like unbreakable promise in that moment is a very cool, like anchoring dynamic to the game.
I feel like alliances in Cosmic Encounter work that way, where everything is basically a lie and you're not beholden really to anything. And this being sort of derived from Cosmic Encounter, I think that this is a direct reaction to that, probably.
It makes sense.
Or it feels like that.
Yep.
It also lowers the temperature at the table. Cosmic Encounter can get really anger inducing because like you could just get screwed so hard in that game. And the way the turns are structured, it takes so long for you to do something. It's a pot boiler. It makes you really frustrated.
I mean, there is a reason we stopped playing it.
It's true. But in Dune, everything was very even keeled. And you also, the way the turn is structured, like you're constantly kind of doing stuff, even if it's not like your turn. Because there aren't really personal turns. There's like phases where everybody kind of goes in sequence multiple times over the course of the larger turn. It just makes it feel like you're constantly doing something, that you're not just sitting there having stuff happen to you.
That's great, man. That's great. It's very exciting. I'm looking forward to playing it. I'm definitely looking forward to getting in on a game in the vein of all these other games that I love. And, I am shocked Ed didn't take your temperature when you turned down Power Grid, but I can see why. I can absolutely see why. Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Dune, the board game?
Surprisingly well themed. It also feels like Dune in a way, without being like slavishly devoted to the details of the novel. In a surprising way, your commanders can get killed, but they don't get removed from the game. They get put in the cloning tanks, and you could buy them back later.
All right, that's awesome.
Which is just so Dune, and like without being specific, it works really well. I felt like it was a very Dune experience. I think the fact that I had recently reread both of the first two novels gave me sort of like a leg up in appreciating the flavor of Dune over the folks who had just recently seen the movie, for instance, because the clones aren't really in the movie.
Right.
But yes, for 1979, having a game really cleverly and thoroughly embodying its theme and its license, I think is extremely surprising and is notable on that level alone. If you play this, you're going to play and you're going to feel like you're in the Dune universe in a way that's sort of unique and special.
Very cool. Well, this is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, posting. I don't think I've posted much about Dune at all, actually, but maybe in the future. You never know. You got to keep watching.
2023, 2024. We'll get there. You can find me across social media at John McGuire RPG on the Twitter, on the TikTok, and on the Instagram. If you want to buy my books, Rocket to Russia is available right now on Exalted Funeral. Escape from Point Nemo will be there soon. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got early release episodes. We got a behind-the-scenes look at 3-2-1 Action. We got a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book. What's it called, Stu?
Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground. A guide to tabletop role-playing games from Dungeons & Dragons to Mothership. My God, why does it not get easier?
Because we've been calling it tentatively titled Experience Points for a year and a half. Anywho, you get a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book, as well as the other books that he's working on. We got a killer Discord community we'd love for you to be a part of, and some more stuff there, too. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.